The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, against the backdrop of failed negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, has decided to go all in. Russian troops are desperately trying to break through in Donbas, and Vladimir Putin himself is creating informational conditions for the resumption of forced partial mobilization of reservists to replenish the Russian army. In fact, this is about preparing society for a new wave of mobilization, but under the cover of military training for reservists. At the same time, the Kremlin has decided to involve Belarusian military personnel in the war against Ukraine, in the western part of Belarus. Residents report the urgent call-up of reservists for unscheduled training, which has caused a wide response and a wave of discussions on social media. Belarusians are being called up for training literally on the same day, without any prior notice. And earlier, let me remind you, Russia demonstratively attacked the northwestern regions of Ukraine with missiles and drones. At the same time, analysts from The Economist insist that Vladimir Putin has fallen into a trap of his own making. The chances that his troops will achieve anything in Ukraine that he can call a victory are fading. Many hope that peace talks will give Vladimir Putin a way out of the situation, since United States President Donald Trump will force Ukraine to cede the territory of Donbas to Putin. But in reality, this option is becoming less and less likely. That's why Putin decided to go all in, announce mobilization, and throw absolutely all resources into the war in a last attempt to win. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and leave your comment below. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, the Deep State project claims that the Russian army continues assault operations in the area of the village of Grishino, which is located northwest of the city of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. Unfortunately, over the past day, the occupiers managed to achieve success there. Russian troops also have territorial gains in the villages of Reznikovka and Golubovka. There, due to the enemy's advance, the gray zone has also increased. Earlier, the Russians captured the main heights in Mirnograd and Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region, which significantly worsened the already difficult logistics. Now it is impossible even with the help of robotics. The occupiers are also bringing their infantry groups and drone operators into Mirnograd and have already deployed artillery equipment, a commandant's office, and command headquarters in the city. But this is also important. Pokrovsk and Mirnograd are not 100% occupied. These cities play an important role in the defense of the Pokrovsk flank. If the Russians succeed there, they will then begin an offensive either towards the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration or in the direction of Kharkiv or Dnipropetrovsk regions. Right now, the armed forces of Ukraine control the northern part of Pokrovsk and the northern part of Mirnograd. At the same time, there are more and more reports that the losses of the Russian army have begun to exceed the number of new recruits. That is why experts from the Washington Institute for the Study of War insist that Russian President Vladimir Putin is creating informational conditions for the resumption of a forced partial mobilization of reservists to replenish the losses suffered by the Russian army in Ukraine. According to them, the preparation for a new partial mobilization is evidenced by laws adopted at the end of last year, which allow the Russian Ministry of Defense to use a 2 million strong mobilization reserve, as well as the fact that the influx of contract soldiers has stopped covering the losses at the front. According to Western intelligence estimates, in January the recruitment pipeline brought the Russian army 9,000 fewer people than Russian generals lost on the battlefield. And although the Russian authorities declared that reservists, those who serve in the army and have signed a contract to be in the reserve, would only be sent to guard critical facilities, the law states in fine print the possibility of using them outside of Russia. Moreover, since November, military enlistment offices all over Russia have been conducting year-round conscription. And in December, Putin signed a law on training for reservists. And accordingly, all this indicates that they are preparing to use these reservists later in the war. And let me remind you that the previous round of mobilization in Russia in September 2022 caused such a sharp wave of discontent and an exodus abroad. Officially, that's between 700,000 and 900,000 people. Putin, as experts emphasize, is afraid of a repeat of this. Although the current pace of recruiting contract soldiers only allows the army's numbers to remain stable, it certainly doesn't allow for forming reserves for a future summer offensive. And now I'll quote from the Institute for the Study of War's report. Putin has been trying to balance, as they say, between guns and butter for a long time. The need to prevent public discontent over another large-scale partial mobilization, the need to maintain the pace of the offensive, and the need to preserve the workforce in both the civilian and defense industrial sectors. And the already strained Russian economy relies on replenishing the army with contract soldiers. This is the basis of Russia's war of attrition strategy. But the very possibility of this system is nearing exhaustion in 2026. The Kremlin's efforts to prepare Russian society for a new partial mobilization of reservists indicate that Putin is facing a difficult choice. By the end of 2025, the Russian Defense Ministry's recruitment campaign brought 423,000 people into the army, as previously reported by Deputy Chairman of the Security Council Dmitry Medvedev. A year earlier, it was 450,000, and in 2023, 500,000. Last year, it was 425,000 people. But Putin decided to involve the Belarusians in psychological intimidation as well. In the western part of Belarus, residents report an urgent call-up of reservists for unscheduled training. It is reported that men in the western regions of Belarus are receiving draft notices for military training without prior notification. Social media users note that the notification is delivered within a single day, and deployment to training grounds happens just a few hours later. Editorial teams from various investigative groups emphasize that previous campaigns to call up reservists were not met with such an active response. The publications mention Grodno, Slonim, and the village of Baranki, where, according to local residents, groups of reservists are being formed. Residents state that among those called up are numerous parents and women with medical education. One of the messages says that the summons was delivered very early in the morning, and by the evening the person had already been sent to the training ground. At the same time, the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine reported that there is no movement of equipment or accumulation of additional troops at the borders with Belarus. Therefore, the Ukrainian military considers the call-up of reservists in Belarus as an information attack aimed at intimidating Ukrainians and diverting military resources from the front line. And on this topic, The Economist published an excellent article which I highly recommend you read in full. And in it, experts claim that Vladimir Putin has fallen into a trap of his own making. The chances that his troops will achieve anything in Ukraine that he can call a victory are rapidly fading. Here's a quote. Many hope that peace talks will give Vladimir a way out of the situation, since United States President Donald Trump will force Ukraine to cede territory. In reality, this option is becoming less and less likely. And even if a peace agreement is reached, the consequences inside Russia could cause economic and political instability, disrupting Putin's plans to join the ranks of the greatest czars in history. The first problem for the Russian dictator is the battlefield during World War II. From June 1941 to May 1945, the Red Army advanced 1,600 kilometers from Moscow to Berlin. In the longer full-scale war of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, Russian troops in the Donetsk region have advanced only 60 kilometers. At the current trajectory of events, Vladimir Putin will not be able to change this. During the first 3 years of the full-scale invasion, Russia was building up its army, but at the end of last year, the Russian Federation began to lose more people than it could recruit. The second issue is that money is getting harder to find. War expenses are equivalent to 90% of the federal budget deficit, the rest of the economy is shrinking, debt payments are rising, and the outlook for oil revenues is bleak. But in the end, experts conclude that Russia's military aggression is unlikely to stop, even despite all this. The Russian Federation can strike Ukrainian cities and power grids to undermine the morale of Ukrainians and Ukraine's economy. But air attacks alone are unlikely to lead to capitulation. Putin may believe that Europe will abandon Ukraine, but European support, I remind you, increased last year. On the contrary, his biggest hope may be that Ukraine will go through a political crisis or run out of fighters and weapons before Russia does. However, Putin's bet on Ukraine's collapse over the past 4 years has been a losing one, and the chances of that happening are decreasing. Then the question arises, why doesn't Vladimir Putin agree to peace? Well, first of all, Putin is trying to secure in a peace agreement the successes he will never achieve. That is, give me Donbas. And secondly, Putin understands that peace in Ukraine could provoke a crisis in Russia. The economy has already been shifted to a war footing, and that's what allows it to survive somehow. And the soldiers returning from the war will definitely cause chaos all over Russia. That's why Putin is betting on continuing the war just to preserve his regime. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like if you found this episode interesting and useful. You can support the work of this YouTube channel financially with your donation or a paid subscription using the links and details in the description. I will be grateful for any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.